There are things every German engineer knew to be true in 1939. Not assumptions, not propaganda. Professional conclusions built over decades of precision manufacturing that had made German industry the envy of the world. The rule was simple: quality beats quantity. A weapon built to exacting specifications, maintained by trained specialists, engineered to perform at the absolute limit of what materials and design could achieve, that weapon wins. That philosophy built the Tiger tank. It built the Messerschmitt. It built the most technically sophisticated military machine Europe had ever seen. And it was the foundation on which German professional opinion rested when the United States entered the war in December 1941. America, in the German professional assessment, built things the way it built everything else: fast, cheap, and in enormous numbers. Ford and General Motors and Chrysler were car companies, not weapons manufacturers. American industry was powerful in the way a flood is powerful, overwhelming in volume, impossible to direct precisely, incapable of the finesse that real warfare demanded. German officers who had studied American manufacturing looked at the output figures and saw exactly what they expected to see: mass production, standardization, the deliberate sacrifice of quality for quantity. And nowhere did that assessment seem more obviously correct than when German engineers and mechanics first laid eyes on the vehicle the Americans were calling the Jeep. A quarter-ton truck, four-wheel drive, simple engine, crude construction by German standards, stamped metal, basic welds, no pretense at elegance. The kind of vehicle a German military engineer might have designed as a first prototype before the real work began. It carried 4 men or 800 pounds of cargo or towed a small artillery piece. It had a top speed of 65 miles per hour on a good road, which Germany's roads generally were. It got remarkable fuel economy for its size, which German mechanics noted without particular excitement, since fuel efficiency was not the metric they prized most. It was, in the professional opinion of the men who examined it, a toy, functional perhaps, adequate perhaps, but not a serious military vehicle, not something built to German standards, not something that would matter in a real war. By 1944, that assessment had become one of the most expensive mistakes in the history of military planning. To understand what the Jeep meant to German military thinking, you have to understand what German military thinking was built on. The Wehrmacht, in 1939, is the most mechanized army in the world, but not in the way the word implies. German motorization is selective, specialized, and deeply unequal across different unit types. Elite panzer divisions move fast, hit hard, and are supplied by a logistics chain that functions with remarkable precision at the cutting edge of the advance. Behind them, the picture is radically different. The vast majority of the German army, the infantry divisions that hold ground, the supply columns that keep the advance fed and fueled, the reserve formations that fill gaps in the line, moves on foot and on horseback. In 1939, the Wehrmacht fields nearly 600,000 horses. By the height of the war, that number will exceed 3 million. 3 million horses, moving at the speed of a walk, eating food that has to be supplied alongside the food for the men, requiring care and veterinary attention and rest in a way that no mechanical vehicle does. Germany's military doctrine accepts this because it accepts the geography it expects to fight in. European roads are good. European farms can supply horses. European distances, by the standards of what Germany's armored spearheads will travel, are manageable. The Wehrmacht is designed for a war fought in a relatively contained space, with a short logistics tail, against enemies who can be beaten fast enough that the limitations of horse-drawn supply never become fatal. America's military thinks about logistics differently, not better necessarily, in the professional judgment of German observers in 1939 and 1940, just differently. American military planners look at the distances their army might need to cover, not European distances, but Pacific distances, Atlantic distances, supply lines measured in thousands of miles rather than hundreds, and conclude that the solution is mechanization at every level. Not just at the cutting edge of the advance, every level, every unit, every squad, every platoon, every company, every battalion, every element of an American military formation should be able to move under its own mechanical power, carry its own supplies, and maintain its own equipment with tools simple enough that any reasonably trained soldier can use them. The vehicle that embodies this philosophy more completely than any other is not the Sherman tank, or the B-17 bomber, or the aircraft carrier. It is a quarter-ton, four-wheel drive truck that a journalist nicknamed the Jeep in February 1941, and whose name stuck before anyone had time to come up with something more dignified. The Jeep's origins are almost absurdly American. In June 1940, as Germany completes its conquest of France in 6 weeks, and the world absorbs the shock of what a modern mechanized army can do, the United States Army issues what looks on paper like an impossible request. 135 American companies receive specifications for a light reconnaissance vehicle, a quarter-ton capacity, four-wheel drive, wheelbase no more than 75 inches, empty weight no more than 1,300 pounds, with a fold-down windshield and enough engine power to move men and equipment over any terrain. And they need a prototype in 49 days. 133 companies don't respond. 2 do. American Bantam and Willys Overland. Ford joins later. The 3 companies produce prototypes within weeks, and the Army, facing the reality that one manufacturer alone cannot produce the numbers it needs fast enough, makes a decision that would have been inconceivable in German military procurement. It orders production from multiple manufacturers simultaneously, standardizes the design so that parts are interchangeable between vehicles from different factories, and begins scaling output as fast as American industrial capacity allows. By the time the United States formally enters the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Jeep is already in production in numbers that would have staggered German military planners. By the end of the war, 640,000 will have been built, 56% by Ford, the rest by Willys Overland, parts interchangeable between every single one of them. Replacements available within hours, anywhere, on any front the American Army is fighting. German mechanics, who encounter the first captured Jeeps in North Africa in 1942, examine them the way a master craftsman examines something built by an apprentice. The welds are functional, but not elegant. The engine is simple, but not sophisticated. The design is clever in a utilitarian way, but makes no attempt at the precision that German military vehicles aspire to. The professional verdict is what it was always going to be: adequate, crude, mass-produced, not a serious threat to German engineering superiority. What those mechanics don't yet understand is that adequate, crude, and mass-produced is precisely the point. North Africa, 1942. The desert is the first classroom. The Afrika Korps has been fighting in terrain that punishes equipment mercilessly. Sand gets into everything. Heat destroys lubricants. The temperature swings between day and night are severe enough to crack seals and warp metal. German vehicles, precision-engineered, specialist maintained, built to exacting tolerances, require constant attention from trained mechanics to keep running in these conditions. When a German vehicle breaks down in the desert, it stops until a specialist can get to it. When a part fails, it waits for a replacement to come down the supply chain from Germany, a supply chain already stretched to its limit across the Mediterranean. American Jeeps operating in the same desert don't stop. When something breaks, the driver fixes it with the basic toolkit in the vehicle and the general-purpose knowledge that American military training builds into every soldier who operates one. When a part fails, a replacement is available from any other Jeep in the formation, because every Jeep uses the same parts. The vehicle was designed from the beginning with the assumption that the man driving it would also be the man maintaining it, and that the maintenance should be simple enough that he can do it under fire if necessary. German mechanics observing captured Jeeps in North Africa begin filing reports. The reports are professional, careful, and somewhat grudging in the way that professional assessments always are when the conclusion they're reaching contradicts what the assessor expected to find. The Jeep's simplicity, they note, is not a deficiency. It is the design. The interchangeability of parts is not a compromise. It is the intention. The vehicle's ability to keep running in conditions that would ground German equipment is not luck. It is the result of deliberate engineering choices that German military philosophy would never have made, because German military philosophy begins from different premises entirely. The reports filter up through German military channels and largely disappear into the bureaucratic weight of a war being fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. There is too much else to worry about. The Jeep is noted. It is not acted upon. Then Normandy happens, June 6, 1944. The scale of what the Allies put on the beaches of Normandy in a single morning is something that German military planners had gamed out in theory but never quite internalized in practice. By June 10th, 4 days after the initial landing, more than 12,000 vehicles have come ashore. Not tanks, not artillery, vehicles, jeeps and trucks and half-tracks and command cars and supply vehicles of every description, rolling off landing craft and immediately moving inland to support an army that is expanding its beachhead hour by hour. German officers watching from what remains of their defensive positions see something that their professional training has not prepared them for. Not the individual vehicles. They know what Jeeps look like. They've been fighting alongside captured ones for 2 years. What they are not prepared for is the density. The sheer, unrelenting density of American motorized transport pouring onto a beach in quantities that make no intuitive sense to a military culture that thinks about logistics in terms of horses and specialist vehicles and carefully maintained supply chains. Vera Lindemann, commanding the 3rd Company of the 919th Grenadier Regiment, files a report dated June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, that captures the moment with a precision that no amount of post-war analysis can match. His unit has destroyed 12 American reconnaissance vehicles the previous day. He expects, based on everything German military doctrine tells him about how armies supply their forward units, that this will mean something, that the loss of 12 vehicles will create a gap, a delay, a visible disruption in the American advance. Instead, he writes, he counts 40 vehicles in the same sector the next morning. He destroyed 12. 40 appeared. That arithmetic, the arithmetic of American industrial production translated directly into battlefield logistics in real time, is the moment that something shifts in German professional military thinking. Not universally, not immediately, but the reports accumulating from officers in Normandy in the days and weeks after D-Day all circle around the same central observation. The Americans are not fighting the way an army with limited resources fights. They are fighting the way an army fights when it has decided that resources are not a constraint. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Schroeder, serving with the 352nd Infantry Division, the same division whose defenders fought on Omaha Beach on June 6th, writes a letter sometime in the weeks after D-Day that becomes one of the most quoted German assessments of American military power from the entire war. He has watched a jeep strike a mine on a road in Normandy. The crew climbs out unhurt. They transfer their equipment to another vehicle, a replacement that has appeared, von Schroeder writes, within minutes. The destroyed jeep is left where it sits. No investigation, no salvage team, no recovery operation. Just abandoned. Left on the road like a piece of equipment that has served its purpose and been replaced by another identical piece of equipment that was available before the first one had finished burning. He writes, "The Americans fight a rich man's war. They expend vehicles the way we expend ammunition." In a German military culture where losing a vehicle through neglect could bring severe consequences, where mechanics were specialists, where each truck was maintained carefully, where the loss of any piece of equipment triggered paperwork and accountability and investigation, the image of an American crew abandoning a jeep without a second glance and continuing their mission in a fresh replacement is not just surprising. It is genuinely incomprehensible. Von Schroeder is not a man prone to exaggeration. He is a professional officer writing a professional assessment. And his professional assessment is that he is watching a military operating according to a completely different set of economic assumptions than his own, one in which the individual vehicle is disposable because the supply of vehicles is, for all practical purposes, inexhaustible. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Normandy, the same realization is arriving through different channels. A young German soldier, watching an American supply convoy moving on a parallel road, asks his superior officer a question that the officer will remember for the rest of his life. Where are their horses? The boy has grown up in a war where armies move on horseback, where the horse is the fundamental unit of military logistics for everything the tanks and trucks don't cover. He has never seen a fully motorized army. He doesn't have the conceptual framework to understand what he's looking at. His officer does, and the understanding is not comfortable. Each American infantry division operating in France has approximately 2,000 trucks in its logistics tail. There are roughly 40 American divisions in France by the summer of 1944. The math is straightforward and devastating. 80,000 trucks, moving fuel and food and ammunition, and replacement vehicles and medical supplies at mechanical speed, 24 hours a day, across a front that is expanding faster than German defensive lines can contract to meet it. The German army has 3 million horses across all fronts and perhaps 100,000 trucks. The asymmetry is not a gap. It is a different species of warfare, and the German army is fighting the older one. The Jeep itself, in this context, is almost symbolic. 640,000 of them, built to a single, standardized design by 2 American manufacturers using interchangeable parts, are distributed across every American formation at every level. 149 Jeeps per infantry regiment, 17 per parachute regiment, 24 per glider infantry regiment. They tow 37mm anti-tank guns and lay telephone cables and carry forward observers for artillery and evacuate wounded and mount machine guns and drive through mud that would stop a German horse-drawn supply column for hours. They go everywhere. They do everything. They break down and get fixed by the soldier driving them using tools that fit in a bag under the seat. They hit mines and get replaced before the smoke clears. German mechanics, who get the chance to examine captured jeeps in France, are more sophisticated in their assessment than their counterparts in North Africa 2 years earlier. They understand now what they didn't understand then. The welds they dismissed as crude are crude because crude is fast, and fast is how you build 640,000 of something. The engine they dismissed as simple is simple, because simple means any trained soldier can fix it without specialist support. The interchangeable parts they noted without excitement in 1942 are the feature that makes the vehicle genuinely inexhaustible in the field, because there is never a shortage of parts when every vehicle in your formation carries the same ones. One German mechanic, working with captured American vehicles late in the war, makes an observation that stays with the men who hear it. We designed our vehicles to be good. They designed theirs to be good enough. But in overwhelming numbers, in total war, good enough wins. He is right, and the German army has run out of time to learn from the lesson. By August 1944, the Red Ball Express is running. Nearly 6,000 American trucks operating on a dedicated one-way highway circuit, driving 24 hours a day in rotating shifts, moving 12,500 tons of supplies per day from the Normandy ports to the advancing front lines. The drivers are overwhelmingly black American soldiers of the Transportation Corps, men who have been told by their own country that they cannot fight in integrated units, now keeping the army that is liberating Europe supplied at a pace German logistics cannot match and cannot disrupt. The Jeep is part of this too. Jeeps run ahead of the convoys, scout road conditions, carry orders from command to drivers, coordinate the endless flow of tonnage that keeps the American advance moving faster than anything German defensive doctrine anticipated. The vehicle that German mechanics dismissed in 1942 as a mass-produced toy is, by 1944, the connective tissue of the most mobile army in the history of warfare. German commanders watching the Red Ball Express from a distance understand what it means. Some of them say so in reports. Some of them say so in private letters. Some of them don't say it out loud at all, because saying it out loud is an admission that the war is already decided by something that has nothing to do with tactical genius or the fighting quality of individual German soldiers. It's decided by 640,000 jeeps and 6,000 trucks, and the industrial capacity of a country that was building cars by the millions before the war started and simply redirected that capacity to building military vehicles instead. If this story is still in your head right now, if you're still thinking about a German officer counting 40 vehicles where 12 used to be, that like button is the right response. Hit it. The strategic consequences of American vehicle superiority in France are not subtle. The speed of the Allied breakout from Normandy after Operation Cobra in late July 1944, the advance that covers in weeks what German commanders expected to take months, is inseparable from the logistical capacity that the Jeep and its larger equivalents represent. German defensive doctrine assumes that advancing armies slow down as they extend their supply lines. Every army in history has had to stop and consolidate when its logistics tail gets stretched. It is one of the fundamental constraints of warfare, as reliable as gravity. German commanders planning the defense of France in the summer of 1944 are counting on this constraint to give them time to regroup, to shorten their lines, to prepare defensive positions that the Allies will have to batter their way through. The Red Ball Express breaks that assumption. The American army advances, and its supply line advances with it, at mechanical speed, at a volume that German calculation had never factored in, because no previous army in history had moved supplies this way. By September 1944, American forces are outside Germany's western borders, having covered distances in weeks that German planning assumed would take at least a year. The Jeep is Eisenhower's tool for understanding it on the ground. He drives one himself, constantly, moving between units and commanders at a pace that would have been impossible for any previous Supreme Commander to maintain. His personal relationship with the vehicle is the relationship of a commander who understands that the speed of his own movement is part of the speed of his army's movement, that the ability to be anywhere on the front within hours, to see conditions firsthand, to make decisions based on what he personally observes, is a command capability that previous wars simply did not permit. When the war ends in May 1945, Eisenhower will write that the Jeep was one of the four tools, alongside the bulldozer, the 2.5-ton truck, and the C-47 transport plane, that made Allied victory possible. General George C. Marshall will call it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. Not the atomic bomb, not the Sherman tank, not the B-17, the Jeep. The quarter-ton truck that German mechanics examined in 1942 and dismissed as a mass-produced toy before watching 640,000 of them win the war. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Schroeder's letter survives the war. The destroyed Jeep on the road in Normandy that prompted it, the one abandoned without investigation while its replacement appeared within minutes, does not. Somewhere in a French field, the rusted remains of one of 640,000 identical vehicles still lie in the soil, unremarkable, unretrieved, exactly as American military doctrine always intended it to be. Enzo Ferrari, who will build some of the most celebrated precision-engineered vehicles in automotive history, visits the United States after the war and is asked what he thinks of American cars. He says the Jeep is America's only real sports car. It is not entirely clear whether he means it as a compliment. It is entirely clear that he is right. German automotive manufacturers in the post-war years study American production methods with the seriousness of men who have learned the hard way what happens when you dismiss mass production as inherently inferior to precision engineering. The lessons absorbed from examining American military vehicles, the standardization, the interchangeability, the deliberate prioritization of maintenance simplicity, influenced German industrial philosophy in ways that last for generations. The country that built the Tiger tank eventually builds the Volkswagen Golf. Quantity and quality, it turns out, are not opposites. They are both possible if you start from the right premises. The Jeep itself never disappears. It becomes the Wrangler. It becomes the Land Rover and the Land Cruiser and every other vehicle on Earth designed to go anywhere, under any conditions, and keep going. The design principles that German mechanics dismissed in 1942, simple, robust, maintainable, replaceable, are the principles that define off-road vehicles for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. But none of that matters as much as what happened in the summer of 1944, on a road in Normandy, when a German lieutenant colonel watched a Jeep hit a mine and a replacement arrive before the smoke cleared, and sat down to write a letter about a rich man's war. He was right. America was fighting a rich man's war. That was always the plan. We carry these stories carefully, every fact verified, every name checked, every detail earned. If that standard matters to you, subscribe and help us maintain it. Where are you watching from? Drop your country below. Better yet, What forgotten story from your nation deserves this treatment? We might cover it. We read every suggestion. Thank you for carrying the weight of this story forward. The story of a quarter-ton truck that won a war, and the men on both sides who understood what it meant before anyone thought to write it in a history book.